arrive. First, though, a reminder of our top stories here tonight. And the Met Office has issued its first ever red alert for snow in Scotland. Hundreds of flights and trains are being cancelled across the country as the big freeze causes widespread disruption. Theresa May has said the European Union's proposals for Northern Ireland's border with the Irish Republic threaten the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom. And President Putin has blamed Syrian rebels for the collapse of a truce which was intended to allow civilians to escape from eastern Ghouta on the outskirts of Damascus. Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the next half an hour or so, we're going to be talking through the headlines with political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha. So very good evening to both of you. So let's take a look then at what's on those front pages. And the Financial Times leads with the news that thousands of jobs are at risk as retailers Maplin and Toys R Us collapse. The Mirror has the same story with the headline, Heartbreak on the High Street, as 5,700 jobs are at risk. The Express says it's the worst snow in 30 years and warns of a risk to life in parts of Scotland. Whiteout Britain is on the front of the eye as road, rail and air travel are all badly hit by freezing temperatures. On the front of the Metro, hands off our borders as Theresa May rejects EU proposals that would see Ireland split from the UK. The Telegraph has the headline, Remainers try to stop Brexit with proxy war as allies of Boris Johnson say the Irish issue is being exploited. The Guardian says pressure is growing for Theresa May to reveal a Brexit plan for Ireland. And the Times leads with the same story, saying that David Davis has threatened Brussels over the Irish border dispute. So it's whether or Brexit, really, on those front pages, isn't it? I think we'll cover both with Isabel Oakeshott and Sonia Sodha. But let's start with Brexit, shall we? Because you picked out the Telegraph to kick us off with. Their headline says, Remainers try to stop Brexit with proxy war. So what is this proxy war? What are they referring to?
Every day's a Brexit day, isn't it? But this was a
every day's a proxy war as well.
Particularly dramatic day for Brexit. So there's lots going on, but essentially the big story today and will be in tomorrow's newspapers is very much about the Irish border issue, which is a very kind of complex one that the politicians are wrestling with. And I mean, there's definitely a feeling amongst Brexiteers, a strong feeling that this issue is being used by Remainers to try to derail Brexit. You know, the idea that it's irresolvable and that actually in some way the entirety of Brexit will have to collapse because no solution can be found to the question of what kind of border arrangement you have between Northern Ireland and the rest of that country. So that's where we are, and you know, Theresa May's been very robust on it. We've seen her today coming out and saying pretty much hands off our borders. We're not going to be held hostage like this by the EU. And there are suggestions in tomorrow's papers that David Davis is actually at the point of saying, look, unless we resolve this, we're not going to pay the Brexit bill. So things are pretty heated.
Is that how you see it? A cynical attempt by Remainers to kind of weaponise the issue of the Northern Ireland border to try and block Brexit?
I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to hear that I've got a different take on it to Boris Johnson. So that's obviously Boris Johnson's take on it. I think the counter-argument, which I very much see light in, is this idea that there really is an irresolvable issue at the heart of the Irish border. We've known this issue was coming down the track for a long time. One of the problems is that the Good Friday Agreement, which has been incredibly important to achieving peace in Northern Ireland, is very reliant on the fact that there is no border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Now, one of the problems is that if we leave the customs union, as Theresa May has set out very clearly that she wants to do, that raises the question, well, how do you not have a hard border if we leave the customs union, which implies that you need to have at least some sort of border checks. And that seems to be, in fact, what Boris Johnson was saying in his letter that got leaked earlier this week. So I think that is a really intractable issue. I think what the EU has said is, you know, this is a negotiating position. They've always said that, you know, the UK and the EU have agreed that the Good Friday Agreement is absolutely paramount, that there cannot be a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Now, I can totally understand what Theresa May is saying in the sense of, well, you know, we also don't want there to be a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK and the Irish Irish Sea. And the problem is kind of how do you resolve that? And what the EU has said is this is a backstop measure. If there is a way that you, Britain, who wants to leave the EU, can see of not having a hard border that would involve border checks, it would involve lots of security issues, which eventually could potentially jeopardise peace, then come on, show it to us. What is it? And
otherwise, Northern Ireland needs to be in a customs union to avoid that.
And so I think we need to see, the Prime Minister's giving a big speech on Friday. That will be the time for her to show her hands. I've not seen any evidence yet that there are workable solutions on this issue. If they are there, she needs to talk about them on Friday.
As I am absolutely sure she will. I mean, I think what Brexiteers, and I'm talking about not just Brexit supporting MPs, but all those that they resent is the kind of emotionalisation of this issue. We're using the words hard border a bit like the word hard Brexit is being used to kind of create a vision of as if there's going to be some huge wall with all these garrisons and checkpoints. I don't think that's necessary at all. I think that we will see Theresa May come up with some very viable proposals. It is absolutely not beyond the bounds of technology to come up with systems for checking goods as they come to and fro. It may well be that there are trusted trader schemes. There isn't actually at the moment a giant flow of all sorts of different categories of goods. It's actually a relatively limited amount of types of categories of trade that is going on there. So I do think the issue is resolvable. Okay. It would be absurd if it ended up derailing Brexit.
Well, that might be the kind of detail we hear more from Theresa May on Friday. In the meantime, Jeremy Corbyn returned to the issue of Brexit at PMQs. He clearly feels a bit emboldened by Labour having come to a decision on, certainly on the customs union issue earlier this week. Do you think that's right?
Yes, and I think it was actually quite a significant shift in Labour policy. Labour have now said that they are in favour of the UK remaining part of a customs union.
It's pure opportunism, isn't it, by Jeremy Corbyn, who doesn't believe in it?
But there were lots of Labour, and I think there has been a lot of pressure from within his own party of MPs who do believe in it.
But the trouble is they're not representing their constituency, because a majority of Labour voters voted for Brexit.
Yes, they voted to leave the European Union. They did not vote to leave the customs union. Turkey, for example, is in a customs union with the EU.
Remaining in the customs union just makes a nonsense of Brexit.
I don't think it does, Isabel. I don't think it does.
Because we can't strike trade deals.
Well, I actually don't think that the freedom to... I mean, that wasn't on the ballot paper when people voted. And there's lots of speculation. There's lots of speculation about whether certain voters might have voted on immigration, whether some voters might have voted, because of sovereignty. We're just second guessing now. And actually, a customs union was not on the ballot paper. So I think it's a really sensible position from Labour. I think it's going to get very interesting politically over the next few weeks. The government have kicked the customs bill into the long grass, but they're going to have big political problems because there are going to be cross-party amendments around whether Britain should stay in a customs union. And I think with Labour backing it, potentially with some Tory rebels, she could lose the vote.
Big vote in May, for May. OK, let's move on to the other big story, the weather, which is on so many of the front pages with some extraordinary pictures, but also a very serious message out there as well.
Well, it's almost getting dangerous. I mean, apparently literally getting dangerous.
Well, in Scotland, this
and unfortunately, there have already been, of course, some quite serious incidents linked to the weather. So rather than just talking about how good or bad it is, we picked out a few of the quite interesting angles in tomorrow's papers on the weather, one of which was really resonated with me, actually, because there's a story on the front page of The Times. I don't know whether we can bring it up, about the sea freezing over, which I have never ever seen.
They're on the right-hand side.
So this is in a place called Bembridge in the Isle of Wight, very near where I have multiple holidays every year. Lovely.
That's the one we're talking about next.
That's yes, not the Armed Forces one, but the one on the right-hand side there. About the sea freezing over at Bembridge Harbour, which is would be quite spectacular to see. I've never ever seen that. So
that's cold, isn't it?
Very cold.
OK, let's move on to that story that we just gave a little sneak preview of there, which is on the front of the Times. Spend more on armed forces or risk defeat. This is from a military chief.
Yeah, so this is a very significant intervention by General Sir Gordon Messenger, an interview with the Times, where he has set out that he believes that our current defence budget is not adequate to protect and keep us all safe in the near term. I mean, he's talking about a time frame of 10 to 15 years when the sort of global picture will become more dangerous. And the politics of this are quite interesting. We've got a new Defence Secretary who's come in very robust on the need to have more budget for the armed forces, very much striking a change of tone with his predecessor, Michael Fallon, who was always sort of rather quiet about battles he was fighting behind the scenes for more money for the armed forces. Now, the new Defence Secretary is very close to Theresa May, and I think he may feel that puts him in a stronger position to win fights with the Treasury on this. But it's extremely difficult. They need a lot more money, potentially up to £2 billion a year, and that is going to be extremely hard to extract.
And it's not the first time that we've seen headlines like this, is it? So is Gavin Williamson doing a
What's
good
unusual
job,
is it's from a defence chief. Now, they're not normally allowed to speak out about defence budgets. This is quite unusual. It's a very good get by Deborah Haynes, the defence editor of The Times, to get a senior chief to actually come out and say this, and it will have been authorised by the Defence Secretary.
So will it make a difference?
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see. I think it's part of a to and fro that we see in many other areas of state spending, actually. So we've seen very similar headlines about the NHS, with people who work for the NHS, very senior doctors saying, you know, we've not got enough money here. I think we've seen the same thing from head teachers in schools. We're seeing the same thing in adult social care. So I think this is really reflecting the pressure that there is across all areas of the state, across all areas of spending. There really isn't very much that's been protected. And I think, you know, this is part of the politics of different people playing for extra money.
Indeed. On that note, we're going to take a pause. Lots to talk about after the break, including Together at Last, the Fab Four. Not a Beatle in sight, though, but there is a prince or two and a future queen. Stay tuned.